We're just shy of 2 months out from Revenant's release date, and opinions of him on the internet from a competitive perspective have been pretty grim. While I don't disagree with a lot of these opinions, I still like the character very much and feel quite at home playing them. Here's my take on how best to play him and how to be as effective as possible with him. This video is sponsored by EA. Check out Respawn's exclusive Twitch Prime skins for Apex Legends, where they'll be publishing a free new skin every month through at least June. This month's skin is the Lucky Charmer Mirage. If you're an Amazon Prime or Twitch Prime member, get yours free at the link below, and don't forget to subscribe to your favorite Twitch streamer for free every single month as well. Revenant's role on a team is pretty tough to describe. To be honest, he's not all that much of a team player, but his abilities can be paired with just about anyone for some really interesting interactions. No team is necessarily better for having him, but talented players can do some very disruptive things that no other legend can. I think Revenant then is by definition a win more legend. If you play card games like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone, you'll already know where I'm going with this. A win more card, or in this case a win more legend, is one that typically helps you win games if you're already winning. However, if you're losing, it's unlikely they can be used to establish a comeback or at least significantly delay losing for enough time for some kind of random lucky thing to happen like a third party. Revenant is not a character that will help you turn a loss into a win, barring some kind of shenanigans with his ultimate to retrieve banners, but that situation is unfortunately just that, shenanigans. Revenant is the kind of character you choose to style on your opponents with while having a somewhat useful kit, unlike, say, Mirage, where most of his kit is completely unhelpful in most situations in high-level lobbies. I know we're really grasping at straws here to make a point, but here's my reasoning. Let's say you've got a really good and aggressive team. You're loaded to the teeth with 99s and Peacekeepers, and you're rolling up on an enemy squad. Typically, you can call targets and focus people down really fast, and systematically push your way through teams. However, since everyone and their mothers are running Wraith, Pathfinder, and Gibraltar, things sometimes get muddied by their ability usage to escape fights. If you're forcing Legends to use these escape abilities to not get instantly melted, Revenant comes in clutch to silence that away and guarantee knocks. Worst case, if Revenant is 1v1 versus somebody else, the silence does 10 damage and can be awkward to aim through when you're standing inside of it. That damage can often make the difference in DPS wars, and I've gotten a lot of knocks and even kills with the silence so far. I think one of the biggest things people do wrong with this legend is that they're not using the silence often enough. In most situations, I think you're better off using it on cooldown in fights and just trying to get damage from it rather than trying to go for that perfect silence during whatever fight you're in. You should of course feel free to deviate from this if you think it's right in your situation. Patience can be a virtue, but it's not common that it's the necessary play in my opinion. More often than not, I think that damage is the way to go, and the silence is just an after effect that you like. It's generally not the thing that you're trying to hit on someone. For the naysayers, think about it this way. Just because you hit a silence on a Wraith in a fight doesn't mean that you've necessarily done a good job. It doesn't mean that you've played the legend correctly. The way to use this ability correctly is to advance the game state in your favor as hard as possible. The frequency that you'll get a silence on an enemy that will immediately lose them the fight because they're silenced is incredibly low. If you're in a fight where the silence is what won you the fight and not the damage or anything else, I don't see that necessarily as a win for Revenant. I see that as an opportunity for you and your team to improve in terms of positioning, rotations, callouts, or just general game sense to have taken the fight in the first place. If your fights are that close all the time, you're probably either a Masters level player that's got no business taking advice from me, or you're a more average player that has some other aspects of their game approach to work on instead of having a character crisis. Continuing on our discussion about the silence, there's a few other things I use it for which are minor but super useful. For starters, you've got to remember that the orb you fire out stays active for 6 seconds, and will guarantee its 10 points of damage whether an opponent is hit by it directly or walks into it 5 seconds after it lands. This means that it's a small, area of effect, position denial, or information gathering tool in some situations. I'll often use it in doorways or at corners of building exteriors if I'm on the defensive in a fight, or if I'm hard running from a team or something like that, because what it'll do is, in some cases, it can lightly obscure me so people can't see me easily. They can't track me easily. If I get a hit marker a few seconds after I put it down, I know that someone is chasing me hard and that I need to continue full running and keep kiting them for as long as possible. Strategies like this, these little small optimizations, are not game changers, but they're just that. Little small optimizations. They're things that will help you out, that will help you gather information for your team, that will let you see places which you're not looking, if that makes sense, and it can be useful when flexed in the right way. The other fun thing I've been using my silence for lately is to practice extreme grenade arcs. What I mean by that is if you aim straight up, then drop your aim down by a few degrees and release the silence, you can practice distances for lobbing these things over cover or even onto high ground. I've been getting more and more comfortable with these angles, so I can start throwing real grenades with the same angles. It's kind of a meme to be sure, but destroying somebody on a rooftop with a frag grenade that you threw like 85 degrees up from perpendicular it's just cool. The cool thing too when doing this is that with frags in particular, they don't bounce and roll around nearly as much when thrown in this way. They detonate pretty much instantly. In fact, I've sometimes even seen them blow up in the air just a few feet above the ground, which is incredible. So while this isn't an intrinsically good part of Revenant, it does give you free practice on a niche technique, which I think is pretty cool. Plus, on top of everything else, your silence actually makes a really loud noise whenever it impacts right next to somebody. So if you shoot it at your teammates' feet when they're looting, you might scare them long enough that you can steal the purple armor from the death box that they're looting. So loot goblins rejoice. This is absolutely the best character in the game specifically for this reason. No one else can be a goblin better than Revenant. Well, except maybe for a wraith that drops a portal right in front of you when you're about to loot to teleport you away from the loot, or maybe an octane that jump pads you, but apart from that, pretty good goblin. Next up, let's move on to Revenant's ultimate ability, which is Death Totem. The vast majority of the feedback I've seen on this legend is all focused here. We'll touch on that later, at least briefly, and I agree with a lot of it, but for the time being, this is what we have. Let's talk about how best to use this ultimate in its current state, and if we get buffs down the road, cool. For starters, I'm going to be a little bit edgy in stating that I think most people are not using this ability correctly. In fact, most people just aren't using it at all for solid reason, I will say. Popping your ult, taking the buff, and then running in on an enemy team, in my opinion, is a really bad ordering of events. You're running at roughly 600 HP worth of enemies, with significantly below that, assuming that everyone's got purple armor. You're subtracting 100 health from your team's health pool per person taking the buff. That's no good. Instead, I like to use it once fights have already broken out and positions are roughly established. I use it to alter the tempo of a fight and catch people out of position. So, how do you do this? Well, I think at least, pretty simple. Whenever you're in a fight and you get your armor cracked, you need to have the game sense to know whether or not the opposing team is healthy enough and aggressive enough to try and full commit on you for the knock, thirst, and then the subsequent armor swap. Whenever you think this is going to happen, that's the point where instead of healing or running, you pop ult, take buff, and immediately re-peek that team. Your objective is to catch them out of position trying to move towards you, and get as much damage as possible on them before you end up getting killed and returning to your totem with 1 HP. In this situation, if you die, you're no worse for wear than you were previously. You're right back behind cover and you're weak. Same situation pretty much exactly, but you're guaranteeing that after losing your first fight, your second one is completely safe. And if you're killed with that buff active and teleported back to your totem, you now have a chance of engaging this enemy team pushing you for a third time with one final peek. If you're running a choked out peacekeeper or a wingman, a sniper, whatever, any kind of one-shot high-damage weapon, you're potentially in a pretty good spot. And if you can get a fast spray with a 99 or something else because you're a god, then by all means, do it. The idea here is that you're already in a situation of incredible risk and you're already probably going to die, so you might as well change up the tempo of the fight, change up the rules of engagement a little bit and see if you can't flex that sudden change to your advantage. When you get really high level, and maybe one day if people actually start doing this and this becomes a proper strategy people employ, then you can start working in mix-ups of, okay, well, the opponents heard me drop my totem, but I'm going to go ahead and not take the buff and then do something completely different or heal or whatever, and it's going to all just mess up everyone's playstyle, and then Revenant just gets better and better when the mind games start happening. But that is an absolute pipe dream which may never come to fruition, but it's just something that's kind of fun to think about, if nothing else. Anyways, this ideal situation, quote-unquote, is not the only usage, so let's just quickly list off some others. You can use this ability while gravely injured and in cover to attempt to run out and get an armor swap and some meds off a death box nearby. If you get shot and you get returned to your totem, you're not in any worse of a position than you were before, but if it works out in your favor, all of a sudden, you have extra health. So if you do die while looting that box, but you get the armor at least, then you're coming back with 101 HP instead of 1 HP. So, it's something. It's truly something. You can use this ultimate for a risky execution for an armor refill, or to let your teammate you just picked up push a fight with you immediately after resurrection with no chance of getting re-knocked right away, or just simply to defend yourselves against an enemy team that you know is pushing you while they hear you rezzing, and you think, okay, I can res in 4.5 seconds or whatever the timer is, and they're going to get here in 5 or 5.5 seconds. That means that I'll have enough time once I pick them up to drop the totem and they can take the buff, because they won't be able to heal, but they can at least get death protection. So if they do die, then they go back to the totem and they have 1 second chance at fighting. They may die instantly at the totem and never have a chance because of the flashbang effect, but what if they don't? What if that buff is enough to allow them to actually do something useful, you know? You're basically just taking a bad situation and forcing your opponents to get the better of you not once, but twice. You're not giving yourself a great advantage, but you're definitely putting your opponents at a disadvantage in that situation. And that alteration of tempo that I was talking about before, I think is what you're supposed to use this ultimate for more than anything else. Another situation might be, let's say that you're ballooning in towards some other fight somewhere, and you can land out of bounds, either on top of a rooftop that's out of bounds, or in one of the rock wall formations that's out of bounds, whatever the case may be. Let's say you land way up there, you can put your totem in the literal out of bounds area where you're getting that countdown timer, take the buff, drop down, and then either try to sneak your way into some of the death boxes and steal some loot, steal some ammo, some meds, guns, whatever the case may be, or just screw up the fight and just start shooting people, throwing grenades, try to get some extra knocks, and just cause some chaos, whatever the case may be. When you get shot and killed, if you get shot and killed, you're going to go right back to out of bounds where no one's going to have any idea where you are, and you should be pretty free to just heal yourself. You'll have a completely refreshed out of bounds timer, and you have a good 20 to 30 seconds out there where you can heal, hide, and then when you think it's time to push, or if you just want to wait till the timer is approaching 0, whatever you want to do, you can just jump right back in there and have full HP and fight a second time, and you can actually flex the totem to your advantage. One of the initial suggestions that I've seen all over the internet would be to always place the totem up high in a spot where people can't really see up there, and you'll have a pretty safe resurrection up there, which I think does remain true. Like there is really something to that. That is one way to use the totem effectively, but this is just an extension of that, where you're going to go so high or in such a weird place, you're going to go literally out of bounds, and like people are just probably not going to find you or be able to do anything about it, even if they do know where you are. Another use of this ultimate that I thought would be really good, but seems to actually in practice not be very useful, is looting and reviving people outside of the ring. Basically, with how short the duration of this ultimate buff is, and with how low the ring damage is before round 4, you can't consistently run out for loot and just let yourself die to zone and get teleported back in. If you're going to make plays like that, what you need to do is bring a grenade so you can kill yourself with the grenade to get the guaranteed teleport back to your team. It's a play that I have made more than once, but it just does not come up often, so just be aware that if you're going to try to make some sort of outside the ring play with your totem, be prepared to not get shot at and not be killed, and have a method of killing yourself so that way you can just teleport back to totem and be fine and not have to deal with running back or potentially losing your buff with like 10 HP left, and then you actually get knocked out of ring and then you're completely screwed, because that's happened to me many times too. So just be careful with those plays. You can do it, but gotta play around it. One other thing that I'll note about this buff, which is really technical and it was a little bit confusing to explain, but I'll try my best to make it as simple for you as possible. So whenever you pick up the buff, the location at which you're aiming is saved, but not all of it. So basically, wherever you're looking in like a rotation left to right, that bit of information is saved. So let's say, for example, that you are looking exactly east at 90 on your compass when you pick up this buff, and then when you die, you're looking at 180, for example. When you respawn at the totem, you'll be looking at exactly 90 once again. The difference here is that this only applies for the left-right of your aim. So if you're looking straight up or looking straight down while you pick up this buff, that part does not matter. You will be reset so your aim is perpendicular with the horizon. So you have to keep this in mind when you're picking up the buff, is you not only want to just pick the buff up when the time is right, you want to make sure that you are aiming your crosshair, at least from a left to right perspective, in the correct location when you pick the buff up. There's two major reasons for this. The first reason is that if you are killed and you teleport back to the totem, you want your aim to be in a location where, let's say if you think someone is going to be pushing your totem and trying to get the refrag on you as soon as you're teleported back, you want to make sure your crosshair is in position for you to continue holding mouse button or right trigger or whatever to continue shooting and kill them the instant you teleport back, because your ability to perform actions does not seem to be disabled. You seem to just instantly teleport, and otherwise you continue operating normally. So that is one consideration. The other consideration would be, and I think this is by far and away the more common one, is let's say that you have put the totem way up high in a really precarious location or something like that. It could be anywhere, really. It could be behind a rock, whatever. Doesn't matter. Point being is that, let's say when you are killed with death protection and you're teleported back, you're holding W or you're holding forward on your left joystick, so you're walking forward in a straight line. What happens if you picked up that totem while looking in a stupid direction? You're going to jump off the building you're on top of, you're going to walk out from behind cover, and you're just going to get instantly refragged as soon as you teleport back. So you need to be very careful of where your aim is placed when you pick up the buff, because that will determine where you're looking when you're teleporting back, and that can be a boon, but that could also be a huge, huge detriment to you depending on how well you prepared yourself to enter the death protection buff. So keep all of that in mind. I think it is very, very important, and it has significantly improved my Revenant play over the almost 2 months now that he has been out. So I strongly recommend that you also do the same. Beyond that, let's just summarize. I think that people are using the totem incorrectly most of the time. I think people are in general being too offensive with the totem most of the time. I think it should be used mostly defensively when you have no better or other option. It's just an extra tool in your toolkit. It's not meant to be used as an ultimate, quote unquote, in the traditional sense where you use it to go and nuke people. If you use this 0 times in a full game, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You only want to use it when it really makes sense or there's just no better option. Finally, we'll mention his passives briefly along with some closing words. First thing to mention is that Revenant qualifies as a low-profile legend like Wraith and Lifeline. This means that incoming damage against him is increased by 5%, so he's going to die in roughly 1 fewer bullet to most things. This is not the end of the world, but it's a trait that he arguably does not need to have, and I would certainly argue that he probably does not need to have it. Secondly, your true passive is not really the best in the world, but I personally like it quite a lot. It makes your crouch walking speed the same as normal walking, and it allows you to climb farther. I like to think of it as simply a buff to the fundamentals of movement, so to me the ability feels really good. When playing with a Pathfinder on voice, I'll often try to coordinate pushes onto rooftops with them where I'll set up a climb to the roof, and have them hold off on grappling until we can both get up there at about the same time. Otherwise, the fast crouch walking is great for situations where your teammates are dead and you're trying to get banners, or even just to mix up your AD strafing and present a different profile to your opponent. I personally don't use that latter strategy much, but some friends of mine that also know life this character and are better players than me swear by it, so give it a try. If I were the king of game balance at Respawn and I were to rebalance all the legends in the game today, the first experiment I'd do with Revenant specifically is to remove the low profile trait from him entirely. I'd maybe then tweak up the duration of his totem's death protection buff so it can last a little bit longer, and then make it so you respawn with 5 HP instead of 1 HP. The reason for this last change is that so you can survive a single tick of caustic damage without immediately dying again. However, if you position yourself badly enough to take 2 ticks, or the enemy caustic is good enough to force you to take 2 ticks, then yeah, he wins and you lose. Apart from that, I don't think this legend needs to be made significantly better than they currently are. They would probably be good enough at that point to simply be an okay off-meta pick, instead of just complete dumpster garbage. Anyways everyone, while I think Revenant is not the best pickup right now if your goal is to have the highest possible win rate in ranked lobbies, I do think he's totally fine for casual games and can be a lot of fun. Despite him not being the best, I like his voice acting in Kit and plan to play him a lot more because I personally just enjoy him. So anyways, if you have any thoughts or strategies that didn't make it into today's video, please leave them down below in the comments section because you just might help somebody out. Thanks again for watching. Take care.